American games throughout the 20th century progressed with the ever-evolving nation. These activities came to reflect the troubles and attitudes of the times. Games at the start of the 20th century focused on the rampant capitalism. Because people were suffering under poverty, they made games in an effort to influence the social culture. Monopoly embodied the anger people felt towards the greedy and gluttonous robber barons. Originally called the landlord's game, the early version of Monopoly came in two versions. One where wealth was distributed amongst everyone when it was created, and another where the objective was to utterly bankrupt your opponents by building monopolies. This was supposed to lead people to the morally correct option of sharing wealth. However, the version that stuck, the one that we play today, was the latter. Ironically, the game was plagiarized, and money was made off of the original creator's work. While new games were gaining popularity, an old game was being altered. New variations of chess were developed in the 1910s, such as League and Chess and Double Chess. League and Chess was invented by L. Ligon with a new board setup and different pawn movements. Double Chess was invented in 1916 by Julian Hayward. It required a 12 by 18 board, unlike the usual 8 by 8. Board games were designated a new purpose in this decade. They became ways to teach children proper values. The toy sewing machine and the merchant marine game are examples. Another game introduced in this period was Ouija. It opposed the new trend by being a game designed for adults. A.C. Gilbert invented erector sets, the precursor to creative building games, such as Tinker Toys in 1914 and Lincoln Logs in 1919. The Roaring Twenties, one of the most iconic time periods of the 20th century, was known for its many popular pastimes that remain part of present-day culture. Games published during the 1920s suggested a rich array of themes prevalent during the time period, embracing the exotic, as seen through the many parlor games that entertained the richer class. For example, Mahjong, an ancient Chinese game played both in China and in India, became a craze in the US in the first half of the 1920s. This satisfied the hunger for the mysterious and unknown. Although most of the early board game companies were owned and operated by men, women were a key part of the emerging culture of board games at every aspect of the enterprise. The 20th century board game industry actually had a higher percentage of female contributors than today's digital game business. A popular American board game in this time, Mansion of Happiness, was designed by a woman, Anne Abbott of Beverly, Massachusetts. She was a clergyman's daughter and also invented authors. Other fun fads were the pogo stick, miniature golf, the yo-yo, and of course, hexagonal chess. The Great Depression, a period of the United States history when the general economy of the United States reached a record low, when people were starving. This also negatively affected the success of games, as businesses struggled and many unemployed and impoverished families had little time for leisure activities. Dozens of toy and board game companies, including Pressman Toy Company, the oldest family-owned game company in the United States to date, went out of business due to the economic crisis. Still, many Americans did find time to sit around the kitchen or living room table and play board games. They became a source of escape for those trying to avoid or ignore the hardships of their lives. A plethora of popular board games focused on handling money after the panic as a result of the stock market crash of 1929 and the failure of banks. Games like Easy Money, Stock Ticker, and Finance, which was actually Monopoly under a different name, taught families to believe in big banks and the stock market, impressing upon people the merits of a free market economy. In the 1940s, the Great Depression was ending and World War II was starting. In 1944, Anthony E. Pratt, an English musician, applied for a patent for his invention of a mystery game, originally named Murder. Murder was a game for people to play in bomb shelters. Shortly thereafter, Pratt and his wife, Elva, who had helped design the game, presented it to the Waddington's executive, Norman Watson, who immediately purchased it and provided its trademark name of Cluedo. Though the government granted the patent in 1947, due to post-war shortages, the game wasn't launched until 1949, renamed Clue. During the 1940s, polio emerged as a serious threat to Americans' health, even affecting the president at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Polio also led to the creation of Candyland. In 1948, Eleanor Abbott invented it when she was recovering from polio. It was designed for the children she saw in hospitals suffering from polio. The board game is covered in images of candy. There is barely any counting required, and it kept the kids inside as polio spread outside. In the 1950s, Winston Churchill was quoted saying, "America at this moment stands at the summit of the world." This decade was characterized by prosperity and growth. With the economy prospering and the rise of the baby boom, Americans began to inhabit the suburbs. As parents moved out of busy cities, they found more time to stay at home with their kids. More leisure time meant more game playing, as people sought new pastimes and means to socialize. A great number of bingo halls were established throughout the nation, as bingo night became one of these frequent pastimes. In addition, Milton Bradley's Board Games for Family Fun, a highly advertised collection of board games for the family, gained significant attention. Other, more strategy-oriented board games, such as Larabi, Easy Money, Uncle Wiggily, Expanse, and Game of the States, were all advertised in newspapers, which directed audiences such as parents and grandparents to purchase these more educational games to teach their kids. Chess was also increasingly significant in America, not only as a game, but as a symbol. Bobby Fischer, an up-and-coming American chess prodigy, qualified for the 1959 candidates match, becoming the youngest grandmaster ever. Fischer's record would stand until 1991.
Fischer was sort of a phenom in the United States. We hadn't had anything like it. He sparked a boom in chess where everybody was playing chess because of Fischer.
The 1960s is sometimes referred to as the Radical 60s and the golden era for games. It was in this decade that the American counterculture movement gained immense popularity. Young people dropped out of political life and became hippies. Known for their colorful form of free expression and long hair, these hippies practiced free love and played many games following these themes in their spare time. Twister became an instant success when actress Eva Gabor played it with Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show in 1966. However, some Americans believed that Twister was selling sex in a box because it was a co-ed game that required movement in tight spaces. Twister began redefining American games to be more than just board games, as it was the first popular American game to use human bodies as playing pieces. In 1967, Twister was named the Game of the Year. With the popularity of comic characters such as Batman and Superman, many toy companies began incorporating visuals of these characters on their board games to gain more popularity among kids. Popular board games that are still well known today were first released in the 1960s. King of the Hill, Mousetrap, and Operation. Operation, invented in 1964 by John Spinello, was especially a huge success. A battery-operated game of physical skill, Operation tested players' hand-eye coordination and fine motor skills as they act as doctors operating on a patient. As for chess, in this decade, Bobby Fischer began to play in the Olympiads and led the U.S. team to silver medals in 1960 and 1966. Nonetheless, Fischer wanted more than just silver. He angrily publicized that Soviets had colluded to prevent any non-Soviet, specifically him, from winning after the 1962 Candidates Tournament. During the 1970s, tensions with the Soviet Union progressed along with chess. A famous contest pitting a team from the USSR against teams from the rest of the world took place, with over 2,000 live spectators, capturing the eyes of the rest of the world as a symbol of Cold War politics. Bobby Fischer played for the American team, and the USSR won by a narrow margin. However, in 1972, Fischer took the World Chess Champion title from Spassky in what became known as the Match of the Century.
But for a while there, we went through a big boom with it, and it was sort of the U.S. versus Russia with Fischer versus Spassky, and it kind of mirrored a little bit the politics was going on in the 36 Olympics when Jesse Owens was competing in Germany against their best players, or Joe Louis in the boxing ring against Max Schmeling. You saw that kind of political interest in it at the national level. And in our country, that the Fischer-Spassky match did it.
The most widely publicized match in chess history. In addition to chess, other styles of games grew immensely during the 70s. Computer games first took the stage with the renowned Oregon Trail. Originally designed by a history teacher and senior in college to teach students about the struggles of pioneer life, this revolutionary computer game sold over 65 million copies. The movement into the virtual world had begun. Bobby Fischer went into a period of isolation during the entirety of this decade, and subsequently, American chess lost some of its sensation. Meanwhile, many new digital games took the stage as technology progressed, including Pac-Man and Super Mario Bros. Arcades became common sites for social gatherings as young people would come to play these digital games. Adult party games also gained popularity, such as Balderdash and Pictionary, which rewarded knowledge of culture and politics. As an ever wealthier upper class developed under Reagan's presidency, many Americans had the time and money to host social gatherings where these games could be played. Technology was the major factor in games during the 1990s. Gaming consoles, such as the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, brought entertainment from arcades to inside the home. This sort of gaming provided a personal experience and connection to games. Because there was such a variety and availability of video games, games in general went from being the occasional recreational activity to a lifestyle. Notably, Pokemon splashed onto the scene in this decade, causing an uproar amongst the youth. An import from Japan, the popularity of Pokemon in the United States also showed the globalization of our society. The evolution of games in America continues to reflect its changing political and cultural attitudes. Today, they are more popular than ever, with video game technology constantly improving, but also with immortal games such as chess gaining more and more players every year. There is no foreseeable future in which games are not an integral part of American life.